Urban Gateways has been engaging young people in arts experiences to inspire creativity and impact social change since 1961. The following program celebrates the 60th anniversary of Urban Gateways. The Art and Speaker Series highlights the intersection between the arts and thought-provoking topics. Each event will feature compelling artists, some that are part of the Urban Gateways network, and some from outside the reach of the organization. We invite you to sit back and take in some powerful perspectives that we hope will leave you feeling inspired. Art and Race is brought to you by our sponsors: Salmons Financial Group, Werner Co., ITW, Robbins, Solomon, and Pat Limited, Attorneys at Law, Eric McKissick and Cheryl Mayberry McKissick, Tracia D. Embry, and Deloitte.
White America does not accept the concept that this is a multiracial society.
Demonstrations continue across America.
George Bush doesn't care about black people.
More examples are emerging of police using deadly force.
An Asian woman, 65 years old, kicked to the ground.
Our people are getting killed for no reason.
It is never accepted the fact that there are black people, brown people, yellow people here alongside.
But in Standing Rock, you could feel the resistance happening.
Reported hate crimes, harassment, and discrimination.
People were standing and saying no more.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's segment, Art and Race, where we will get into this wonderful conversation about the intersection of art and race. We know that after the year of 2021, 2020, and still ongoing, that these conversations are critically important. They're especially important for Chicago, and I'm very, very excited to be having the conversation with the guest that we have here today. We are celebrating the 60th anniversary of Urban Gateways and the incredible work that they do in community serving youth, particularly of marginalized identities. We know this conversation is a kind of conversation that many people across the field and sector are having. My name is Ian DeMont Martin. I use he and they pronouns. I am a creative, I'm a writer and director by passion and a creative executive by trade. I am the artistic director of Haven Chicago and also the executive director for inclusion and belonging at the Art Institute of Chicago. I come to Urban Gateways by virtue of the work I did with Enrich Chicago, which is a collective of arts and culture and philanthropic organizations in the Chicagoland area who are all committed individually and collectively to the work of anti-racist organizing. And without further ado, I want to bring into the space, into the conversation, our two esteemed guests, darling, Tonika Lewis-Johnson and Patrick Santoro. First up, Patrick Santoro.
Thank you. My name is Patrick Santoro, and I am an educator artist who believes in the transformative power of stories. I am an associate professor and artistic director of theater and performance studies at Governor State University, where I teach courses in performance and social change, storytelling, performing culture and identity, and writing as performance. I've also, for almost a decade now, have directed many of our productions, including works such as Fahrenheit 451, Fat Pig, A Raisin in the Sun, and For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough. It's really great to be here with you all today.
Thank you, Patrick, and welcome. Next up, I'd love to welcome and have Tonika Lewis-Johnson bring herself into the space. Welcome, Tonika.
Hi, my name is Tonika Lewis-Johnson, and I am a photographer and recently started calling myself a social justice artist since I am expanding a little bit beyond my initial medium of photography. But I created a project called Folded Map that is a visual investigation of Chicago's historic segregation and how it appears in our everyday lives. And in addition to that, I'm also co-founder of Resident Association of Greater Inglewood and Inglewood Arts Collective. And I'm excited to be here with you all today.
Thank you. Thank you both. Super excited for this conversation. Just off the bat, I want to acknowledge that videos and recordings and maybe even some of the segments that we've already done at this point are very presentational, but we're really here for a conversation that I know and trust will be super engaging, really authentic, and not really presentational at moments. So I love the Folded Map project. And I think that the conversation that it starts and its impact in our city. So yeah, I just want to make a little space for you.
Thank you. I think the only thing that I would want to add at the top of the conversation is that, the through line in my artistic practice is creating space and ways for the larger public to engage in very difficult issues of, race, segregation, and really helping the public connect to those issues being the result of decisions that we make or are forced to make in our lives. Because a lot of times when people look at maps or statistics, we disconnect ourselves from it as if it's not a representation of things we think about, decisions we have. Well, the map is such an interesting and important historic tool, but how it's used, who creates it, all of those things kind of play itself out in just the actual document or the existence of a map. And it's something that I felt like Chicago really hasn't wrestled with. And we have this great, unique resource, this reticular grid that we're on. But, we haven't tapped into conceptual ways to disrupt segregation, and we haven't truly amplified the ways in which we actually do disrupt segregation every day, all the time. So I wanted to present all of those issues in a way that was accessible, and so I just felt like using the map, which helps people understand the city's connection to addresses, and then also understanding how we travel through it. We look at maps all the time for public transportation. So I just felt that a map was a way to help make it more personal, if I were able to connect it to how people use it in their everyday lives. So that's why it was really important for me to present it that way and also share the story and how I created the project, which was because I was a young Black girl riding from Inglewood 15 miles north to go to school on public transportation.
We have to understand that when we're growing up and we're in, grade school, I just came across a world geography book, a textbook that was mine in 7th grade. And I remember how much I loved that class, how much I loved being in that class with maps on all sides of the room's walls, and how informative maps are, and how much we actually create our own identities about the world, whether that's big or small, from maps. And so I think the notion of working with maps is really quite significant because maps are all around us.
They are.
They're always informing us.
No, that's so true.
So what you're doing, I think, is a really great way to kind of look at a new kind of map and a new kind of story that needs to be told. Because those maps, interestingly enough, are sort of embodiments. Whether it's the, sense of like, here's the map of the North America, but within that map are embodiments of people and identities and cultures and desires and histories, etc. So what is simple, like a simple map, isn't so simple anymore.
No, that's true.
Right?
That's
so I
true.
love the idea a lot.
Oh, thank you.
One of the maps that I tend to work from, if I can borrow this language now,
Yeah.
one of the maps I tend to work from when I'm working with directing shows that are about experiences different than my own is, so for me, the map begins with acknowledging who I am first and what I can and can't do in certain contexts. So it's about acknowledging my privilege as a white person, as a white, queer identified male. And so the map begins with me saying to a cast of color, for instance, if we're working on a show has that experience at its core, is this is not my story. This is not a story I've lived. It's different from my lived experiences. So as a director, part of what I try to do is to acknowledge the many maps of all of us in the room, and to acknowledge that I don't have the answer, but what I'm here to do is to facilitate a conversation among the maps, right? And to create compelling stage images that help tell the maps' stories. Right? And whether that means it's creating a moment of empathy and identification for the audience, or if it's a moment of creating a rupture for the audience to think and start to do something differently. You know, so I'm really all of a sudden now seeing this link of maps across our work, which is really nice.
And also the storytelling, because I'm using maps in the same way you just described as a springboard into the actual individual stories.
That's right.
Maps are the macro.
Yes.
The individuals in the map, on the map, that's the micro. And so it's all to help create empathy. Same thing, same goal.
Empathy is big, you know, and I think
necessary.
Coming to this conversation, one of the things I thought about is, so what is my role as particularly a director? And I think the role of a 21st century artist, if you're going to work with people whose stories are different, or if you're trying to be inclusive in the stories you tell, are different from your own, I should say, is really about empathy. I mean, I think that's really what we're trying to do when we're trying to work with others to tell stories that might differ from our own. It's about collaboration. It's about empathy, right?
I think that there has certainly been an erosion of empathy. And I think how race has been constructed, how it's been used in policy, or how policy has been used to impact race, has played a major part in that erosion. What does it mean, you know, for white people to be voyeurs or audience to that pain, that hurt, that trauma, and to not respond, to not move, to not act? I think has a lot to do with this conversation about the sort of erosion or lack of empathy. And I think art has such a critical, important role to play and closing that gap and filling that void and sort of repairing, if you will, those sort of synapses. But I think the point you made just now, and to a point you made earlier, Patrick, about, you know, the role of the 21st century artist, I think there's this piece of art as facilitation, right? How do you open up or facilitate a conversation, either with self, with community, with policy, with a city? And I once heard the adage of facilitation as making it easier for people to be together, right? And be, but also I think to work at some ends, right? The role and the ends and outcomes of a director, right? Or being in that role, in that room, right? And the roles is kind of like this social archaeological investigation and facilitation, right? So I think this is all appropriate for this segment, which has been tentatively called Performance, Identity, and Place. And so this conversation about identity and maps and the work that you're doing is already sort of circling in the room and space that we've created. So thank you. I'd love to maybe jump into this next part of this first segment to ask you both to tell us a little bit about how you bring yourself and your communities to your work and your practice.
Well, I bring it literally and figuratively. I have it tattooed on my arm. Okay. I have Inglewood there. And that was very specific because I realized that I'm doing a lot of panels and presentations and people can see this part. And I want people to know where I am from, because them knowing that also helps further the work that I do, because it's disrupting what they have been taught. I know what they have been projected or programmed to believe about Greater Inglewood. And so that is how I bring my community and myself to not only all the spaces that I'm in, but my work. That narrative is always part of it, because I know that's kind of what's necessary to help people start to look at how we judge, stereotype geographies, locations, and we are really talking about people. So, I've definitely ran into people who, before my project was recognized, be surprised that I'm from Oh, you're from Inglewood? Yes. And
comma and then something
exactly.
like
really.
And
it's not, I've heard it so much that the response isn't even offensive. It's literally the fact that I know that they're shocked and why they're shocked. And then I also want them to think about, why are you shocked? So does that mean that you thought people from this neighborhood were supposed to be a certain way and I'm not? So, that's why it's very important for me to always bring my community to the spaces or to the work that I'm doing, because it is exactly that stereotype, that horrible bullying in the media that creates an opportunity for people to devalue not only the location, but the people who live there. And they start to create these weird, identities of who exists there. So that is how I do it, literally on my arm and in my work. Yes.
The body, though, as its own map, with its own indications of histories and landscape, topography, right?
Yes. Oh, I love that.
Ooh, yes. There was something that I wanted to tease out. Well, the dissonance that work starts to create in people that have bought into that programming or don't know that they've been cognitively programmed is also really incredible, and maybe one of the utilities of art that lives at the intersection of race, right? To crack open that gap. Where we can start to, or hopefully people can start to question, right, where's this voice? How did I get here? How long have I bought into this? And what are the implications?
No, that's so true. And then I think as artists, is figuring out which question to ask, because my medium primarily is photography. It could just be assumed that, I'm trying to demonstrate the counter narrative in my images, when actually the larger question, specifically when my everyday Inglewood pictures had gotten some recognition and people were like, oh, these beautiful photos of Inglewood. My question to the public was, why haven't you ever seen these before? Because it's not like these images or these moments don't exist. It's not like, my photography is so amazingly great that it's a specific reason why none of us have seen images of this community in this specific way, with color, with care. So let's ask that question. Why haven't we all seen images like this? So yeah, I think art being used as a way to help us question is really powerful. But I'm also interested to hear how you bring your identity to your work.
Well, I am a very out queer educator. So I mean, that's just a part of the conversation. Yeah. And that sort of overt political positionality is a rupture for some students in the classroom, because they're having to now deal with a teacher who's pretty upfront about their desires. And so alongside that, I also sort of model a lot of my classroom experiences on feminist pedagogy, which is dismantling that there is one person in the room that has the knowledge. Right. And actually, we all have knowledge. We sit in a circle, we dismantle everyone looking forward, looking at people's backs. We try to restructure the classroom in a way that puts everyone on equal footing, right? And truth be told, one of the things that I've realized about teaching is if I'm not learning in the classroom, I don't want to be teaching anymore. So I can't be the only person with knowledge. Yes, I am trained to have a knowledge to teach you, but you also bring and are doing that work with you. You know, one of the things we do at Governor State University is we are the only university, public university in the state of Illinois that bridges both theater and performance studies. So most of us are familiar with what theater is, but performance studies is a little unique insofar as it embraces what theater does, but it's also much broader in its approach. So we're really interested in, for example, how a religious service might be a kind of performance.
Maybe.
How a sporting event is a kind of performance. How we can actually do the work of live performance to learn about ourselves and others. So performance as a method, something we do that is informing. We're also really interested in everyday life performance, how people perform identities, race, class, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, physical ability, etc. So students can't tell me they don't know something about performance.
Right.
Because you thought about what you put on today before you came to class, didn't you? You thought about the car that you bought.
Right.
You thought about the way your bedroom is designed. You thought about, oh, these are choices. And people don't often think of themselves as performers. And they might not all be actors, but we're certainly all performers.
Yes.
Some of us maybe put more conscious effort into crafting those moments, but we're doing this work on a daily basis. So students do have a vocabulary. They just need to know how to use it, how to start thinking about their daily life as performance.
Oh, I love that, because as you were talking about that, I was literally thinking about the fact that, within my work, it's to help people realize the questions that they unconsciously answer for themselves that moves them towards thinking a particular thing. And what you and I are both doing is slowing that process down for people so that they can recognize the actual moments they're making a snap decision. Like you make it so often that you're no longer putting that much thought or process into it, you believe, but you've done that before.
Right.
And so helping them realize, no, these are decisions that you're actually making, or choices that are being put in front of you that you have to decide. And we do make those choices.
We do. For me, so much of what art does and so much of what teaching does is it's consciousness raising. It's a rupture. It's a moment of dissonance that asks someone to consider, why am I answering things that way?
Yeah.
Where does that come from?
Yeah.
Right? So getting them to have a moment is key.
So true.
Speaking of where does that come from? This is a loaded question, so
Go ahead.
But how, if at all, has the ideology of white supremacy or the dilemma or the dilemma of the race construct impacted your work and your practice?
Yeah, no, I would say everything. I actually, every part of my life, like I even think about the ways in which the alternative spaces that I enjoy, that Black people create, that young people create, are usually in response to the exclusion of, the rest of the world as a part of, white supremacy and the hierarchy and places you aren't welcomed. So you have to create those spaces of joy, entertainment. It's not as if it were created just because. It's always as a refuge.
It was a response to the need, right?
Exactly. And so for me, even the creation of my project was me realizing, even though it was at an early age where I couldn't put it all together, I was realizing how this something was controlling a huge part of my life that I was now starting to see is different than other parts of Chicago. And I didn't know what it was. I just knew that what is making my neighborhood look like this? I know it's not my neighbors because, like, I see them cleaning up. Like, this is not them. Why do I have to go so far for school where there's like 3 schools down the street? Why does my mom, all of these things, and me going to the high school that I went to and meeting so many other amazing kids who I thought were like legit reflections of me. They just lived in other parts of Chicago, and I was like, how come we've never met? What, so all of these things. So that by the time I was a senior in high school, it was very clear to me how white supremacy, the hierarchy within that, segregation and race had literally impacted every part of my life. I had to go out of my community just to access the art I was naturally interested in, because there were no spaces for other artistic kids to gather in Greater Inglewood that was supported on a large scale enough. I had to go to college to meet friends that I had literally grown up down the street with.
Wow.
But we didn't have a space to gather. So the older I get, the more I realize how it impacts all of our lives, all of us. Our social networks are constructed not because we think we're choosing friends.
Right.
We're choosing out of what is around us and who controls what is around us.
Right.
So, unfortunately, so much of our lives are influenced by this use of race.
Yeah. I would encourage anyone that watches this to, at home, engage in a quick exercise called the Trust It 10, where you write down 10 people who you trust. And this can't be family members, people who you would feel 100% comfortable in your home without you there. And to think about the different identity metrics. What are the genders of these people? What are the race of these 10 people? What is the education sort of level or degree of these 10 people? And you might be surprised. But I'd love to bring you into this question, Patrick. How do you think, if at all, has white supremacy and the ideology of white supremacy and the dilemma of the race construct impacted your work and practice?
So at Governors, we are a majority minority institution. So most of our students are students of color, 51%. And so the work we do on campus is about facilitating those kinds of conversations. So we are a program that is dedicated to social justice and performance. So the works we do or the classes we offer all have some sort of larger social, cultural, political component going on. So I am, over the last decade that I've been at Governors, have been humbled to work with the student population that we have, to hear the stories, to understand the stories beyond what I could understand of them, right, as a white person entering the conversation. It has really been empowering. Alongside that, it's also really impacted me personally with family members who don't quite see eye to eye with how I see the world and what I want for the world, who don't want to acknowledge their role as a part of this larger ecosystem, because it is an ecosystem.
Yes.
We're all in this together,
yes.
right? It's not just someone's problem; it's all of our problems.
There's
right?
a hole in the boat.
Yeah,
Yes.
totally, and we are
Yes.
sinking.
Yeah.
Yep. And so, how do we patch that up, but genuinely repair? Not just put a Band-Aid on it and get us to the next stop.
While we still have to be in it and ride it.
Right, exactly. And so, like, it has, white supremacy has hit home for me with family.
Yeah.
And that's been a really difficult thing to wrap my head around. And in all honesty, I've had to let go of some of those family members because I don't want we're not on the same sides, right? We're not fighting for the same things. So professionally, the work that we do at Governors, the work I'm doing with students to help create spaces where we can talk about these kinds of stories, our place selections, our selections we feel that our university population and our surrounding communities need to hear or want to hear. We also teach courses where students are crafting their own stories, personal narratives, and are starting to understand what giving voice to their life experiences through performance, what that does. In fact, it's one that I think, it's a story. I've been thinking of a story about how I can talk about the complexity of my own family in this kind of moment in 2021, and what I can flesh out from this experience about who I am in the world now as a person and what I want for us, all of us,
No, I think that's beautiful. It reminds me of a project that I started and actually majority completed during the pandemic, called Don't Go. So it's shortened for the question that a lot of people, or the instruction a lot of people get when they're either transplants to Chicago or, just have only lived on one side of town, and they're always usually told to don't go to the South or West Side at some point in their life in Chicago. But it's so common, it's kind of like the elephant in the room. Like, it's just, we all know it's there. Everybody, I personally didn't know that people still got told that. I was like, oh, wow, that's the secret that's being kept from. But my project wanted to aim to unpack that. And so I asked people to share their stories with me if they've ever been told to not go to the South or West Side and what they did to disrupt it. So what that added up to was, during the pandemic, I was able to interview about 30 people, most of them white, most of them transplants to Chicago. Some of them grew up here and still hadn't visited certain parts of Chicago. And those interviews that I did with them was always going back to the fact that they have to wrestle with family and how that is the part of their work that is difficult and that they know they have to do. Having those conversations with the uncle that's a police officer, your grandmother who you love, but who might have said, who continuously says stuff that's racist. These are the things that the participants of my project were talking about and wrestling with, like having to let family go, And so me hearing that part of the story was definitely helpful in helping me understand how complex this issue is, that we're all wrestling with how this has created this construct of race and power and racism, how it has just infiltrated so many parts of our own lives. And we can't just hear the stories of the ones most negatively impacted. We have to recognize that we all have been negatively impacted. The exclusion of not being able to be around such wonderful people of color. And you realize that when you get to a certain point in life, like, I've been missing out on all of this, but that's important to have at the table, all of these stories together, so we can start to see patterns and create new solutions. So I appreciate that, the school does that to help the students amplify their own narrative.
Yeah, we have a public square, and we use sort of the arts as one space to engage in these kinds of dialogues, these conversations about important issues, and it's all sort of under the umbrella of the public square. You know, GSU is in the Southland. It is a place to come to talk about these things. Something somewhat related. So in 2018, I directed For Colored Girls, and again, part of my process is, look, I'm not an expert on this. I'm here to facilitate, and I need the cast to help me determine what feels good for them, what's true, what's authentic, what's honest. After the show closed, a couple of students in the production had mentioned that a couple of their friends, also of color, did not like the fact that I was directing that play, and I totally get it. The student who was in the cast said, well, they didn't really know our process. They didn't know how you were handling it, but they have some concerns about a white guy coming in to direct that play. So I totally understand that. But I'm just wondering, because it's tricky terrain, how do we ask what we want white folks to do to enter the conversation? How do we also ask that of people of color? Do you know what I mean?
Ooh, good question.
And it's not a one-to-one.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
But it does make you wonder.
Yeah, I think space making is so critical, and it might be a good way to sort of round out this segment. This is great. How does art function as facilitation? How do people, particularly white identified people, function as space makers, function as facilitators? And I feel like you've already talked about that in the role of director in the context of this show, right? How do I facilitate this storytelling? Which is not like doing the storytelling yourself, but it's, again, making it easier for people to be together, right? And so I think part of the dilemma is that some of our work is differentiated, and it needs to be, right? There are certain conversations that don't need to happen in, as my grandmother would say, quote unquote, mixed company, right? And there's some conversations that I don't need to be privy to as a queer black man, right? Like, I don't like, frankly, to hear or watching bodies of white people learn about race and white supremacy. That hurts, because it's a thing, as you said, is impacting my everything, right? My going ins and my going outs. And so when I say like some of our work is differentiated, right? How can we make spaces for that work, right? How can white people make space for that work, and people of color make space for conversations around colorism, which ain't none of your business. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
You know, but like, but when I say that, like, it's differentiated, we can make different spaces. And so I think that's maybe some common ground.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I think that now, more than I've seen before, white people recognize the need for them to create the space to educate each other. You know, like, I think we're finally at that point where that's kind of becoming common knowledge. Like, we can't lean on the people who has been traumatized by this culturally every day of their life for generations to, teach us how to, So I feel as though I've definitely heard about groups of people. Specifically, I'm thinking about this one group of white women photographers who gather to discuss the gaze, the white gaze, and how they can help disrupt it, how they can use their platform to uplift women of color photographers. And that is something I don't necessarily need to be privy to. But when reached out to be the photographer that they want to talk about, yes, I'm going to partner with you and, make sure that the story that you're telling about me and my work is great. And but yeah, I just think it is recognizing and respecting the different conversations that have to happen, and letting it be known that it's not privy for everyone all the time. And especially the conversations with family that white people were going to have to have.
Right.
Like those are spaces we can't occupy.
Right.
You know, nor should we.
Right.
You know.
A greater need now than ever for facilitation.
Yes. Ooh.
Facilitation is a great, to echo what you've
It
said and
is.
sort of brought into focus. Yeah, it's important.
It is.
Thank you both. At the top of this, we were joking that we knew and trusted that this would be an awesome and exciting conversation, and it is already delivering on that front tenfold. And so that ends this first segment titled Performance, Identity, and Place. And now a word from our sponsors.
Hello, I'm Kelly Coomer, Chief Information Officer of Salmons Financial Group and proud board member of Urban Gateways. I appreciate the work Urban Gateways is doing in the Chicago community to bridge arts across all socioeconomic groups. Throughout history, art has inspired action. It's a mirror reflecting the thoughts, images, and emotions that drive change. It shapes narratives of social movements and provides a voice to the otherwise marginalized. Salmons Financial Group is an advocate of social change, and one of the ways we take action is to support organizations that help to shape the culture, creativity, and growth within our communities. Our deep commitment to charitable giving and employee volunteerism led to $3.5 million donated to local organizations in 2020, with employees contributing 2,175 service hours. As a financial services provider, Salmons Financial Group's vision is to create long-term enduring value for our customers, our distribution partners, our employees, and our communities. We make it a point to partner with community organizations that align with our vision of long-term strength and value. By providing young people opportunities to refine artistic skills, share their talents, engage in critical thinking, and explore new possibilities, Urban Gateways inspires creativity, provides voices to young artists, and creates immeasurable value for the youth of Chicagoland. On behalf of Salmons Financial Group, happy 60th birthday, Urban Gateways. Thank you for your ongoing commitment to the young people of Chicagoland. Your work makes an impact for our kids and our community.
Welcome back, and thank you to our sponsors, and thank you for everyone that is still tuning in to this episode of Art and Race. We're moving right along into our second segment, which is titled Education, Mentorship, and Development. I feel like we've already been talking about the role of education and learning, but I'd love for you to speak a little bit about how education and learning fits into your work.
In my early 20s, I had fallen in love.
We love.
And love is love. We love love. Yes. And he had died from a heart attack.
Oh, my God.
And I was 22. I was really young. And I had been in theater my entire life. So one of the ways that I grieved, because I didn't know anything about grieving, because his death wasn't just his literal death. It was also a death of so many things. You know, thinking of my queer sexuality as a kind of death. Thinking of my estranged relationship with my father was a kind of death. So it opened the door to a lot of deaths in my life. And so I went to graduate school, working on my master's in communication studies and performance studies, and took a performance art class. And it was the first time that I had sort of moved from a traditional theater experience to a performance art experience, which performance art is a lot more conceptually driven. It's a lot less straightforward, if you will. It plays with body, space, and time in different kinds of ways than traditional theater does. And so grieving and learning performance art was a way of restructuring how I understood the power and the potential of art.
Wow.
I understood how I could fold my voice into the artwork. I didn't have to have a playwright to say these words. All of a sudden, I became a kind of playwright. I became an artist working on specific kinds of stories about loss, about gender, about sexuality, that really helped me to see the capabilities of what art can do, especially art that is a little outside the box, if you will, right? Art that doesn't adhere to the simple structure of what we know as kind of art. This was definitely, performance art definitely is a sort of, I call it the FU moment to traditional art, right? And it's embodied, it's three-dimensional, it's textured, it's living, it's durational, it's so... Education on that front, having that class at that time in my life, almost 2 decades ago at this point, was a huge game changer in how I understood the power of what live performance can do.
Transformative.
It was truly transformative.
That's beautiful.
And it really allowed me healing. You know, it allowed me to stage works that transformed my sense of grieving self at the time.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing, Patrick. What about you, Tanika? Moment of growth, moment of expansion that you can put your finger on.
Yes, I would say for me, it was a few, like a series of events that also led up to me making the life decision to like actually work on Folded Map. This has been a seed of a thought in my mind for so long. So, you know, creating the project as just an individual was literally just to clear up some space in my mind, because I was like, I gotta get it out of my head and into the world. Whatever it does, but I gotta get it out. But before me realizing that I was gonna prioritize getting this project out of my head, I, you know, solely focused on photography, and, you know, I had relegated it to just being a hobby, even though I am a trained photojournalist. But again, one of the ways in which race and me knowing how it plays, how it interrupts parts of my life, contributed to why I did not want to pursue being a, you know, early staff photojournalist. Because, you know, as you're being new to a job, especially photojournalism, you're going to have to cover crime. You're going to take those exact photos that I did not even want to see any more of. So because I wanted to avoid that that step, that career process, I just kept my photography as a hobby, and I photographed my neighborhood. I photographed me and my friends hanging out. So I had developed this large archive of just, you know, Inglewood photos that as I was doing community work as part of RAGE, Resident Association of Greater Inglewood, I tried to minimize the fact that I was an artist. Like, I don't know why. I was just like, no, I'm showing up for the work. But it was the community that constantly reminded me, like, you are an artist. Like, where are all those pictures that you be taking? Right. Where are you? What are you doing with those? I was like, I don't know. I'll just put them on Facebook. And they were like, why? Like, try to get them exhibited. And I was like, I didn't think about that. Because also, as a photographer, you know, you learn very quickly if you go to an art school. I went to Columbia College. Especially, you know, the age that I am. I'm 41. So I learned, I was one of the last generations that had to learn on film. So you go to art school and you quickly realize photography is like the lowest on the fine art scale. You know, in the in the like late 90s, it was very clear that the only way photography could be exalted as fine art is if it were, you know, some kind of specialized documentary project. But, you know, within the art world, it really wasn't, you know, that high. And so, yeah, my community just told me that they valued my work. They saw it as art, which is what I felt it was. But because, you know, journalism, you just know that if you like to document your community, then you should be a photojournalist. That's just how you're going to get, because it's not necessarily, fine art, try to do fine art photography and get museum exhibitions. There's a clear road that they, encourage you to go down based off of what you like to photograph. And so when I did take my neighbors, all of them, their advice, and started to look to see where I could exhibit, I landed on, exhibiting at the Park District in Inglewood. We were having a large art event. I was like, let me just do it here. This for the people who told me I should. And I did. I used the stage of the, Park's gym. And the event had a lot of vendors. And so my work was center stage, and the community came out, and how touched everybody was. And this is not just people who are only from the community. It was people who were from outside the community, and they were just these pictures are beautiful. This is what we want people to see of our neighborhood. People saying, I've never seen pictures like this of Inglewood. This is so beautiful. That moment helped me understand in a real way the power of photography, how it can be used as a way to uplift and to amplify issues, but also validate existence, validate experience. And so it was at that moment that I was like, I want to use photography as a tool for those realizations, for those moments. And I don't think that without that event happening, I would have seen photography in the way that I do, as an actual tool. It might be worth 1,000 words, but it can also be used as a tool to facilitate a different kind of understanding that doesn't have to just always be attached to a news story. It can have its own agency. And I think that was the event and the moments that led up to me realizing the importance of not only photography, but where it is, how it's presented, what you're doing with the images, how you help people navigate to another thought with imagery. All of that was because of my community forcing me to do something with my pictures.
It's lovely, though. I mean, it speaks to the importance of site-specific work, accessibility, bringing art to local folks who might not have the ability to go to the high art.
Yes.
Right? And so this is, to me, is important work that we need to be doing in our communities.
Yeah, to do more of.
Yes, I am such an advocate on hyper-local.
Yep.
Just go deep, and then share.
I love another adage I heard at some point coming up was think global, act local.
Yes.
I really love that.
Yes. Lorraine Hansberry, I was watching a documentary about her, and exactly.
Love her.
And she said that the more specific your story is, the more universal it will be.
Baby.
I was like,
Yep.
The truth.
Yep.
It's the truth.
Right.
When I teach students how to write narratives that are personal, I use a similar idea, which is that a good story starts with a very personal context because the personal moves to the universal. It's true. The more concrete story you can provide, all of a sudden there are these access points for people to see themselves in your story.
Oh, yeah.
And that's how it becomes universal.
It's the emotion.
Yes.
Y'all remember that movie Hustle and Flow?
Yes.
Okay. There is no reason I should have been identifying with the poor pimp that had a dream
of
to
Terrence
be.
Howard.
But I did.
Yeah.
Because it was such a specific story.
Right.
I was like, I can understand that emotion.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or the silent revolution of a film like Moonlight, which is a queer black man sent me to places, which shouldn't have been as revolutionary as it was to watch a queer black boy draw a bath for himself. But it was the fact that we saw so many people see themselves in Sharon, right?
Yes.
That the revolutionary act of that, the facilitation of that, the empathy of that, of Karen, the 72-year-old retired white woman who sees herself and the little queer black boy drawing his bath, boiling his water to have a hot bath. That's right. You know, I was like, why did it take to 2013 for me to see myself in that way? Who are some prominent mentors for you in your work and your practice? If you could name one prominent mentor and shout them out in this section and maybe how they've impacted you. And we'll start with you, Patrick.
Sure. To go back to that performance art class, thank you, Dr. Stacy Holman Jones, who allowed me and gave me permission to think about art in a completely different way. And her focus was on how art is resistance. So the connection between the work of protest and art. And it's really because of you, Stacy, that I've been able to make those connections and develop those connections through the years. So thank you. Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you, Stacy.
Yeah.
What about you, Tamika?
My mentor, Pulitzer Prize winning photojournalist Ovie Carter, who worked for decades at the Tribune. And I met him through some summer program that the Chicago Association of Black Journalists sponsored for teenagers. And it was a journalism program, summer journalism program, and I met Ovie Carter there. And he was my assigned mentor. And I was literally going to be going into my freshman year at college, and I was just like, I don't know what to major in. Like, I don't know what to do. I love photography, but I love writing, but I don't want to just be a photographer. And so he told me, you have an eye. It's not going to go anywhere. Just keep taking photos. That'll be your proof.
Wow.
Major in journalism, so you got to prove to people you can do before you start doing it. And he gave me that advice, and he gave me my first camera, my first Nikon, not camera, but my first Nikon. And he gifted me 3 lenses.
Wow.
And him doing that, like giving me that piece of advice, like validating me, seeing me, and then gifting me like stuff I actually needed, just gave me confidence that I was able to walk into, college, my first time really truly only being the first Black person in a room full of any other race, and it gave me the confidence that I was going to need to encounter, other people my age who are from a completely different lived experience. And, we were going to be trying to critique each other's work, and how that can get. But, just a shout out to Ovie Carter for seeing something in my work and then giving me the advice and tools I needed to move forward.
Oh.
Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you, Ovie Carter.
Ian, can I ask you, do you have a mentor?
I would like to acknowledge and shout out one of my only mentors. This is something I want to work on, is the director choreographer Ken Roberson, who is a queer Black man from Georgia, honey. I don't know his age, but he once told me about the Ku Klux Klan marching down the dirt road of his hometown and his mom walking outside with her arms closed, like, you're not coming in here. And he's been all over the place. He's been on Broadway. He's choreographed so much I couldn't even begin to start to articulate his resume. But I met him during my collegiate studies at Indiana University, worked on a couple of productions with him, and he's just this constant source of affirmation for me, just in his walking in life, that I can do what it is I intend, and this work, not just in theater, but just, as a queer Black artist. He has a stutter that he has no qualms about. There's just like how he's been able to, and watching him choreograph is just like, yeah. So thank you, Ken. And with that, we'll close out this second segment of education, mentorship, and development, and move to hear the youth with this segment, Mild Sauce.
Hey guys, it's Tyke here from Mild Sauce.
Hi, I'm Shane Calvin, and I'm with Mild Sauce TV.
It's Naeem from mildsauce.org.
Hey, it's your girl Jazz. I'm here at She Love Believe Media under Mild Sauce.
My name is Abdul Shitu. I'm here with Mild Sauce Blog.
Mild Sauce is a youth-led blog zine edited by the young people of street level. We focus on themes, current events, and pop culture through a journalistic lens. The name was created to signify something unique to Chicago with good taste.
I believe Mild Sauce has a big potential, to be very impactful, to be the go-to news source and media source for young people in Chicago.
Our journalists travel all over Chicago, looking for cool experiences, civic discourse, and interesting people.
So a good friend of mine owns a streetwear brand on the south side of Chicago, and we had him come and speak to our class. He came to talk about restorative justice and activism through streetwear, and so we were able to not only learn about his practice and his streetwear brand and restorative justice, but we also got a great story out of it.
They really taught us how to shape our articles, because you can't just write an article like you write an essay. It's not gonna work. You gotta have interesting points and stuff that grabs people's attention.
Usually the people that give us the information, the media doesn't come from the same type of neighborhoods and places that we do. So it makes sure that the people who come from our type of areas always have a voice that's gonna be heard.
The impact that Mild Sauce can have on the city alone is powerful. It could literally change the perspective that the youth see the city in. Because on social media, all they see is people beefing or somebody getting killed, somebody getting arrested. They always see the negative, but because Mild Sauce is controlled by the youth, they get to control the content that they put out to their peers. Whether it's the neighborhood edition or the music edition, you get to choose what we want people to see.
Thank you to all of our participants of Mild Sauce, and thank you all for continuing with this program, Art and Race. This is the third and final section titled Art and Race, Past, Present, and Future. And I want to jump right in and ask you both to reflect on the intersection of art and race, how it has evolved over time, and how your position within that intersection of art and race has evolved over time.
Well, I would just say that art and race, as much as I would love for them to not be so inextricably linked, I support and envision a world where, art can primarily be used just for the sole purpose of art existing. Just, let's paint a flower just because it's a beautiful flower. Let's just, appreciate the aesthetics of all aspects of art. However, because of the world that we live in, we have to use art for so many different things that our society doesn't create space for individuals to do, such as have their own identity. And so as a Black person who appreciates and values the ways in which art has been a space for Black people to create, share, express all facets of their, complicated identity outside of just being viewed as a Black this or that, like as an individual. So it's always linked. Like art has been, I especially feel for Black people, such a powerful tool to demonstrate the existence, their joy, our way we celebrate, just so many facets of our identity that we haven't been able to have actualized completely in this country. And art has always been a way for us to like ritualistically do that. So I definitely feel like I have adopted that traditional like use of art, like using art as a way to amplify and uplift not only my narrative, but connecting it to the larger narrative of the people that I come from, the community that I come from. So art is just an amazing way to kind of insert your identity into the world and other people's consciousness. And I think that's why it's such a powerful tool for protest.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tanika. Ooh, I'm at church. I'm at church. What about you, Patrick? Reflections on that intersection and how your position within that intersection has evolved over time.
For sure. One of the classes I teach is a course on performance and social change. And we study kind of what protest performance looks like, or radical street performance looks like from, throughout the 20th century to the current times. And so I'm going back to the sit-ins, for example, of the 60s, and thinking about that kind of protest, which was incredibly powerful, bodies on the line, thinking to now where we are with protests in the street and how it's remained very similar in terms of the strategies that the performances take, the tactics that are used to create a stage in the street, right? But now we have this 21st century world with social media. And so I'm really interested in how social media becomes an extension of the protest movement, those moments. So really interested in the evolution of protest performance, activist performance, in everyday worlds, in the streets, not necessarily in theaters, but the theater of the everyday.
Yes.
So that's something that I really like to think about and see how it has evolved, and to see how the means of what we can do now, the access that we have now, which is even greater than the access that we had at the time in the 60s, right? So I'm really intrigued at how it's evolved and how it will continue to evolve. It's really interesting to me.
There's something about theater of every day. There's something about art's ability to create space for individuals and communities, especially through your work, to imagine and literally sort of build the world or worlds that aren't here yet. And I see that in theater, I see that in photography, right? Bringing the world, the real world of Inglewood, right, into the conversation, and not this sort of like one note media, right? Sort of lens, right? To literally, to sort of in that way make magic, right? To sort of, if we can't have it in the flesh, to have it on the page, or to have it behind the lens, I think is something that I love in my own personal practice.
Right. We're no longer just consumers. We are producers. And I think we need to remember that in today, especially, where there are so many outlets to put our art forward. There are so many venues to do that. And so we, at this time, can actually be mega producers, if you will, of this kind of resistance.
That's true.
We don't just have to be passive, receptive audience. We can have a say in it. We can help create it.
I'd love to wrap this segment with one final question, which is thinking about past, present, and future. What barriers or obstacles are still impacting communities of color and communities of marginalized identity? And what do we sort of hope for the future of those communities in art?
Everything is still impacting. But if I had to pick one thing that ultimately trickles down into everything else, I would say, like housing as a commodity, land. I did my project Folded Map. It started as a photography project, and it has led me to doing a project about real estate. And so when you talk about race, when you talk about white supremacy, that is always at the core, land ownership. And it is because of that always being an issue that in this country, denying that or taking it from people, that I have found a clear solidarity with Indigenous people. Like there's no way I can talk about the struggles of what my grandparents or Black people's grandparents and forefathers went through just trying to acquire land. There's no way I can talk about that without thinking of my Indigenous brothers and sisters who literal land we are on, fighting for rights that were not given to us on stolen land.
That's right.
The iron, we have to wrestle with that. And I think our conversations, our policies, our practices about land ownership, whether it's actual land or just housing, we have to do better when it comes to that, because that being the bedrock of capitalism and wealth, we'll always see a clear difference in communities, whether it's race or class or whatever. It's just a horrible caste system that is centered around housing. So I would say us trying to get that right would just inadvertently help a lot of other sectors and areas in life that are definitely horribly impacting marginalized communities today.
So, embedded in this conversation of land, I'd like to add this notion that venue. We need more spaces to produce art that comes from the communities. True. Whatever community that is, right? I mean, there are so many stories, Indigenous communities, you name it. We need more venues. We need more space. We need more brick and mortar kinds of places where this can happen. So access is still a big issue.
Absolutely.
So I think we need to sort of rethink that. But I also want to say that, the thing that I find so disheartening is, the programs in education that are often cut first are the arts. Yeah. You strip schools of theater programs, music programs, dance programs, and these are the disciplines that teach us what it means to be human. These are the disciplines that teach those soft skills, leadership, creative problem solving, critical thinking, organization. This is not the stuff we should be cutting.
No.
It's just not the stuff we should be cutting. So we have to find a way, and maybe this is the ever ongoing uphill battle, but we have to find a way to position the arts as more important than ever.
Yes. No, I think this past year should prove to people how critical the arts are.
Right. Yeah, because we need it now.
Where did we all run to last March?
What you looking at now?
Right. Everything. Yeah. Music, plays.
That's right.
Movies.
Oh.
Yeah.
they have saved us.
Yeah.
You know, and even the theater companies.
It always does.
It's true. It's true. I mean, even the theaters, for instance, stopped, right? Broadway just shut down. We still had some really interesting, innovative virtual theater productions and, you know, rethinking what that can look like in these constraints, right? The virtual constraints. But we need to value from the top up. We need people to understand the value of the work that is the arts.
And then the thought process of the creators within the arts world. Like, the way we think is very valuable to the world. You need people who imagine and use what they have to get to the imagination. We're out of the box thinkers, and that is definitely what the world needs.
Absolutely. This has been such a lovely conversation. I want to move us into our final words from both Tonika and Patrick, but also want to leave you with this little bit of documentary. I was just reflecting on a copy of a documentary history of the Negro people in the United States, which is edited by Attica and has a preface by W.E.B. Du Bois. It's a book that I have barely even nosedived into, but the first entry in this documentary history of Negro people in the United States is from 1661, and it's Negro Petitions for Freedom. The first entry in this book, the first entry, documentary history of Negro people in the United States, 1661, petitions for freedom for Negro people. And so the notion of our freedom, liberation as a precedent before even the founding of our country. And so when I think about the aspirations and the hope that I'm having for particularly communities of color and marginalized identities is that liberation. I want to just, in these last moments, have a last word from both Patrick and Tonika, and to thank you all for tuning in today.
Oh, thank you for having us. This is so great.
It's been fabulous.
So as I was saying, my next project, it's called Inequity for Sale, and it is a site-specific project that is memorializing, if you will, still existing homes in Greater Englewood that were sold on the discriminatory housing practice of land sale contracts. So we've all gotten familiar with what redlining is, but redlining created a population of Black people who were vulnerable, who did not get federally backed mortgages to become homeowners. So they were taken advantage of by greedy people. And one of the ways in which they were taken advantage of is through land sale contracts, them being told that it was a mortgage and them later finding out it wasn't. It was a rent-to-own contract. So my project is focusing kind of on excavating that living history around us in the exact neighborhood that everyone loves to hate. So I'm trying to peel back another layer to show people there is a direct connection into what you've been programmed to think about this neighborhood and what has historically happened here. So that is what I'm working on, and I am doing that as part of my residency with National Public Housing Museum as their 2021 Artist as Instigator.
Ooh, love that title.
Yes.
And where can we find you?
TonikaJ.com is my artist website with all of my projects. And then, of course, if you want to dive into the social justice reality TV of Folded Map, you can go to foldedmapproject.com and view the Map Twin videos there.
Thank you so much, Tonika. It's been a pleasure.
So currently I'm directing a play by the name of Bob Rauschenberg America, and it's at Governor State University, and it is written by Charles Nee in the style of visual artist Robert Rauschenberg, who was a collagist and a performance artist, and one of those 50s, 60s artists, performance artists, avant-garde folk. And so it takes a look at America, and what better time than now to do that in 2021. But it is a series of moments, scenes that, when strung together, help to tell the story of what this landscape is all about, this landscape of America. But when looked at individually, they're sort of like independent art pieces, but it really is about that layered collage experience. So we're working on that now, and it plays April 8th, 9th, and 10th.
Fabulous.
So by the time this hits the internet, it'll be over, but maybe there'll be some things to read about it.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
And where can we find you or follow your work?
I'm not as connected into social media as I like to be. Tanika, you can help me. You can help me. So I'll give you our Facebook page, facebook.com, TAPSGSU. You can find out a lot about the work we're doing at Governor State University.
Brilliant. Well, it's been a pleasure, Patrick. Thank you for being here. And last, I'd love to tell you a little bit more about the work that I'm doing. Feel free to check out my website, iandemontmartin.com. That's DAMONT.com. Haven Chicago, the company that I'm the artistic director of, we will be filming and debuting a short film that I've written and directed called Save Face. The log line is, in a world where people of color are presumed extinct, a black boy must navigate personal and political revolution when he is suddenly thrust out of hiding. And so that's on the docket. And then also, I'm going to do a puppet opera of Margaret Garner. So check that out. And thank you so much to Urban Gateways. Congratulations on 60 years of incredible work in the community of Chicago, incredible work with youth. And we can't wait to join the conversation again with you all soon. Thank you so much.
Art and Race is brought to you by our sponsors: Salmons Financial Group, Werner Co., ITW, Robbins, Solomon, and Pat Limited, attorneys at law, Eric McKissick and Cheryl Mayberry McKissick, Tracia D. Embry, and Deloitte.